Hello, welcome to this final session of the SOPA Awards 2020 Media Insiders, a special series of webinars brought to you by SOPA, the Society of Publishers in Asia. My name is James Crabtree. I'm sitting here in Singapore, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar. Before I begin, a little bit about SOPA. SOPA was founded in 1982 to champion freedom of the press and excellent journalism here in Asia. And the SOPA Awards for Editorial Excellence were established nearly a decade and a half later in 1999. The awards cover a range of categories from opinion writing to investigative journalism, and as we're going to find out today, collaborative journalism reflecting Asia's journalistic environment. So our session today, as you just saw, is called Pangolins, Public Service and the Benefits of Collaborative Journalism. And so we're talking about journalistic projects that are conducted between different kinds of media organizations. And I'll introduce the two multiple award-winning projects that embody this. But I think it's worth saying that collaborative journalism, for all of you watching, I'm sure you're aware, has been a big and interesting trend in journalism all around the world. From WikiLeaks to the Pentagon Papers, there have been major stories that have been worked across borders and between institutions. Also, because of the changed media environment in which we operate in, collaboration often brings together different institutions with different strengths, for instance, in print media and video, or social media and video, in different geographies in different countries. And it's particularly useful in a global era for exploring transnational issues. Things that might cross borders between the rich world and the emerging world, or between one half of the planet and the other. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I'm joined by three guests, two from Jakarta and one in Malaysia. So first, as part of our project, both of whom work for Vice Media, we have Rizky, who I think can see on the screen now. There we are. I think you can see everyone, who works for Vice as a producer, a video producer, and Yudi, also a video producer working for Vice, and they were part of an award-winning collaboration focusing on sexual violence in Indonesia. And if I might have the next slide. Our third speaker joining us from KL is Elroy Yee, who works for Rage, which is a subset of a Malaysian media organization, and also a member of an international environmental collaborative organization that produced a piece of work about the smuggling of pangolins, hence our title for the event today. So between them, our guests slapped up 3 awards at the last SOPA gathering, well, not gathering, virtual gathering, which were given out in August around the time of the beginning of the pandemic. The Excellence in Journalistic Innovation Award, which was given to the Pangolin Project. You can see the judges' comments on the screen there. The Environmental Reporting Collective, which is the name of the global organization of which Elroy's organization Rage is a member. It was a great illustration of what technology has enabled in the world of journalism. Next slide. And then also the Pangolins won excellence in reporting on the environment. And so you can see the judges' comments there, an in-depth investigation of impressive scope on an important conservation issue. The dozens of journalists who contributed to that. Next slide. There we are. And then finally, the SOPA Award for Public Service Journalism was won by 4 organizations working together on a project about sexual harassment in Indonesia. And so that was Vice, which Rizky and Udi worked for, along with the Jakarta Post, Tirto, an Indonesian news organization, and for a while at least, BBC Indonesia. Next slide. And so you can see the judges' comments here. High impact collaborative journalism on the widespread but hidden crime of sexual assault on university campuses. Next slide. I think I may have skipped over the slide at the beginning where we were talking about the format for today, but basically we're going to go for 1 hour. I'm going to moderate a discussion between the panelists, allowing them to give an overview first of their projects. And then if any of you have questions at the end, we'll stop with about 15 minutes to go. We're going to go for an hour, so going until 5 o'clock here in Singapore and in Hong Kong. There's a Twitter hashtag, which I will remember which came up on the screen anyway. So if you want to tweet it, then use that Twitter hashtag. I'll remind you about it in a minute. And if you have questions that you want to ask, then use the Q&A function on the Zoom call down below. So with that, let us begin. So thank you for joining us here today. So congratulations to you all. As I think I said when we were talking about this before, I'm immensely admiring of your victory, in part because I was nominated but never came close to winning a SOPA award. So I'm admiring and jealous of your great achievements. So let's start with Vice and the Indonesian project. So Yudi, I think you were going to go first. Maybe you'd be kind enough just to give those watching a sense of how this began. Where did the idea come from, and then how did you develop it to bring in your partners, and then through to completion, as it were. So give us a kind of sense of the project.
Yeah, so the project itself started in late 2018, I guess. In late 2018, there was this piece by Balairung Press, which is a university press in one of the top university in Indonesia, which they exposed a sexual assault, basically, that happened there. The piece, the report was very widely shared, mainly because the officials of the campus was not really responsive to the accusations and to the report itself. I mean, they tend to place the blaming on the victims, and even at one point of the investigations, they say that the victims are to blame because they're asking for it, basically. So that became really big, and that started a conversation, basically, in Jakarta, that the sexual assault in campus, not only sexual assault, but sexual violence in campus. And campuses in Indonesia are really rampant, and there are a lot of cases that remain unsolved, remain unspoken, and remain unexposed. But for the report itself, I mean, basically each media outlets, I mean, Vice, BBC, Tirto, and Jakarta Post reported on that event. But we decided to, I mean, if we're gonna have to have a bigger impact on the reporting, I mean, we really have to collaborate on this. And thankfully, a lot of our reporters and journalists are friends with each other. So basically, that's how it started. I mean, the reports that was published on Balairung Press, which is a university press in Yogyakarta, is the starting point for all of us to dip our feet on the sexual violence on campus. From there, we published several articles, and we even have a platform in which people can actually share the stories, and a video piece that Rizky and I produced. Yeah, I think basically that's it. That's the project. I mean, we call the project Nama Baik Kampus, which doesn't really translate to English. I mean, it's basically, we're talking about reputation. The campus's reputation comes first before the well-being of the victims, and that's where we got the name as well. Yeah, I think that's the overall view of the project.
Great. And Rizky, do you want to come in here and give us you came in maybe or more you contributed more in the latter stages of the project. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just to follow up on Yuda's point. So the four news organizations were really kind of like dividing the kind of like the pieces based on our expertises. For example, Tirto is very good at infographics. Jakarta Post reports in English, and Vice Indonesia is known for like their documentary works, right? So I guess I want to kind of like tell you guys a bit more about the kind of like the collaborative part of the actual video itself. Like even from the very beginning, the the collaboration was really fundamental in kind of like securing access to our subjects. For example, for the girl that we feature in our video, we got her contact from thanks to Aulia Adam from Tirto, and then that's how the project started. Without the collaboration, we would not have been able to kind of like get access to this person, and then so she was actually featured already in Tirto before, but then there was not a lot of kind of like responses or reactions to that piece, and that's why that was kind of like one of the reasons why we wanted to make this movement bigger, and that she herself, the survivor of sexual assault on campus in Bali, she wanted this to be bigger, so that she decided to show her face in this video. And I just also want to kind of like point out that like besides the collaboration between different news organizations, this was also like an exercise in collaboration between different organizations, not just news. For example, because of the decision of the survivors to show her face, so we had to kind of like consider a lot of like problems, for example, in terms of legal and also social backlashes. So we decided to collaborate with other legal aid institutions that were really helpful in kind of like helping the victim, and also Vice itself, to kind of like make sure that what we're doing is not against any law, because the case itself was still in trial. So we just want to make sure that we don't kind of like affect the outcome of the trial. In terms of social backlash, we also collaborated with a legal aid institute in Bali that was really kind of like helpful in kind of like accompanying and giving advice to the survivors themselves, and kind of like giving them like a lot of like options, like if she, and in the end she ended up still wanting to show her face in the end. And so I guess like I would end this by saying that this is collaboration is such a like valuable option for stories like this. First of all, this is an investigation stories that kind of like need a lot of people with not with a lack of funding from each organization. Kind of like combining resources and expertise is really kind of like adds to the value of the reporting itself. And second of all, collaboration is really helpful for stories that try to kind of like empower minority groups and disadvantaged groups that are really often re-victimized in mainstream media. And also some of the stories that are good for collaborations are usually taboo to be talked about openly. So by kind of like combining resources, joining forces with other news organizations, we were able to kind of like support each other in terms of kind of like legal and social consequences that might happen for that rise up from this kind of collaboration. So we really kind of like amplify each other's voice, but at the same time also protect each other in terms of the backlash from the government or even the people themselves. So that's basically the overview.
And so just before I hand over to Elroy to give the other side of this, so you started this out in early 2018. I mean, how long did the process take? When did the final video and the various outputs kind of about this collaboration emerge?
I'm gonna answer this. So, although this process started in 2018, it takes months just to at least get everybody on the same page, and even to divide it up to pieces that Rizky mentioned earlier. It takes a while, and although we already have some cases that we can actually revisit, like the video piece was actually a revisiting of a survivor. We also need to we also want to have a larger look in Indonesia, because like Indonesia is a really big country, and there are so many campuses and universities that may have this issue. So it takes months to at least dividing up the pieces between the organizations, and even like deciding if this case needs to be an interview piece, for example, or a video piece, for example. And because a lot of them are not, as like as Rizky said, it was not as common for a survivor to come out and show their face on camera, or I mean have their name printed out.
Very
So
good.
yeah, so it takes about like I guess in mid April, I think mid-April, we already dividing. We already have like we all already know what's going to happen and who's gonna do what. So I think it
Very good.
takes
But
about
let's
5 months.
talk about the kind of process in a little minute. So it's interesting to think about how you brought together these different organizations with differing skills. But Elroy, maybe can you talk us through how how yours came about? And remember, there was a sort of specific creation story in South Korea, I think, that you mentioned before. So maybe tell us about that, but also sketch out how Rage fits into the wider collective, and how all of this works. I think that would be helpful if you could do that.
So with our collaboration, it started in South Korea. So there was a investigative journalism conference. I think it was in 2017, and that was when I think a few journalists and editors made a connection, and they shared the same passion for environmental conservation issues. I wasn't part of those conversations at that point, but I had met some of them there. And later on, they invited me to join this collective, this new collective. I believe by the time I joined, they had already secured funding from another party. So, and they had decided that the first story they would do would be about pangolin smuggling, because it is a trans-border crime. Pangolins will be harvested from Indonesia, Malaysia, and as far as Africa, as far away as Africa, and transported either by air, land, or sea, and mostly they end up in China or Vietnam. So they decided that that's the story they would attack for their first project. The collaboration kind of grew as we went along. So even after I joined, there were new journalists on new newsrooms that were joining the collective. And there was one of the key moments for this collaboration, I feel, was that all of us met up in Hong Kong. So we saw everyone, all our new colleagues for these projects. We met them, we spoke about our ideas, we went out for drinks and we hung out. So that was really important, I felt, and that built a lot of trust to moving forward. And we learned from experts who were there, who were prepared by the collective to speak to us about pangolin smuggling and other conservation issues. So we learned as well a lot of knowledge, and we brought back and we were able to talk to each other and refine ideas about how we could report on this issue. I think there was a lot of understanding about the needs of local newsrooms to report stories for local audiences, rather than just making a big story for a global audience, which honestly would be an American audience. But it was understood that we had a local audience, and those stories need to resonate with them first and foremost. So I think that was another thing that we did right. And then after Hong Kong, we went back and we just did reporting on local stories. reporting about how pangolin smuggling takes place in our own countries. And then all of these stories would inform a global story, which is almost like a compendium maybe, or a composite of all these local stories that together map out the global pangolin smuggling route. So if you you guys watching can click on the link and read the story. So it starts from Cameroon, from Nigeria, and goes all the way through Southeast Asia, finally ending up in China, where almost, I would say, 3/4 of the consumption takes place in China, maybe even more. So that's how the collaboration started. I think maintaining it very much came down to that understanding of between newsrooms, as well as a strong editorial board. So there was an editorial board with Patrick, who is based in Switzerland, and he's almost like the managing editor. And then there are people who are in the board who would look at our stories, approve our budgets, approve funds for us to do local reporting, and sets broad editorial strategies. For example, some decisions like sending a Chinese journalist to Vietnam, because that was a very key smuggling route. So they make those decisions. Of course, as the local journalists, we would also pitch stories, collaboration stories. Yeah, we were encouraged to pitch collaboration stories. So we pitch stories where, let's say I in KL can work with somebody in another country, and we work on a story together. So local stories was very important, but we were incentivized to seek out collaborations between ourselves. So, for example, a China journalist actually went to Vietnam to report together with the Vietnamese journalist on that smuggling route from Vietnam to China. And all of that just, in the end, was funneled into one big global story, which you see on the website. But at the same time, there was a lot of local stories that were published that came out in our respective publications. So Rage did a big story that focused just on Malaysia, and we presented it as a storybook. So I'd be happy to share the link with you in the chat later on. Just mapping out how pangolin is either sourced from Malaysia or smuggled from Indonesia, and then goes on to Thailand or Vietnam or Myanmar. So yeah, so that's how the collaboration worked. You know, using local stories, trusting local journalists to report and not work as fixers. And all of that reporting informs a global story that we hope is a bit more nuanced than if one famous reporter came in and reported on the whole thing. Yeah.
And so just to be clear, in terms of the output, so you have a couple of nice sort of websites of the whole sort of output of the collaboration. But there was one web-based output that came out from everyone, and then, as you said, so every partner in the collective, including Rage, then sort of did with it as they wanted. I mean, what were the range of the outputs for instance, the other members of the collective? Did they all do something on it, or was it only a subset of the membership of this global organization which kind of picked it up?
Yep. So most of them did their own reporting and published their own stories on their own publications even before the global story. So we allowed them the freedom to do that. There was no worry about you scooping the global story, because we knew that local audiences and international audiences are really just different audiences, and they don't really eat into each other's space. So for example, I believe Taiwan did a very impressive story about pangolin conservation in Taiwan. So that's one story. Tempo in Indonesia did a story about the smugglers from Sumatra to Malaysia. So they even named a few of the smugglers and the business and the company names. Hong Kong also published, Karen in South China Morning Post published a very impressive story naming all the people along the routes from Malaysia to, I think, to Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong to China. So they mapped out these smuggling routes on their own as a local reporters, and this informed the global story, which then told all these stories in sort of like a composite view. Yeah, Rage published that story as well. If you click around the website, you'll probably find our story there. So yeah, almost everyone did a local story. Yeah.
The point, just so I understand the structure of this, you sort of set up a kind of collaborative where you all agreed to tell each other what you were doing, and you shared, let's say one of you sent a reporter to Vietnam via China, then the results of that reporting trip would be shared with everyone in some sense. It'd be quite interesting to understand how you did that. And then anyone was free to kind of publish something on the subject of pangolins, and then, but that would only be published in one outlet, and then eventually at the end of the process, these various pieces in the national publications were kind of brought together, and there was a sort of report that was produced that kind of told the story using these different national publications. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of sharing, it wasn't a perfect situation. I think we're always aware that we can try to do better for the next project, but we use Slack and Google Docs. So Slack would be where we communicate and share leads, but not everyone would be really familiar with Slack. So there'll be back channels talking about through WhatsApp and all that. And Google Docs is where we share our the drafts of our stories. So we can actually, if we ask, we are obliged to share with everyone in the collective. In fact, not only were we allowed to publish local stories in advance of the global story, we're encouraged to do so. We're told you should publish local stories in advance of the global story. And then the global story is a different animal altogether. The editorial committee sits down, takes all the stories, all the information from the different local journalists, and hammers out a long form, I think it was like a 25,000 word article or something.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so, Yudi, I mean, how did this work in your case? I'm quite interested to learn more about how you create a culture of collaboration. So you may not agree with this, but Vice, for instance, has a reputation for being quite aggressive, assertive, eye-catching in the kind of format it does. And so not every journalistic organization operates in that with that kind of style. So both in terms of, journalists are quite secretive beasts. We like to guard our scoops and hide our information. So both in terms of how you said you knew all of the people together, so you had this trust element, but how did you get people to work together, and how did you deal with kind of clashing approaches of style, sort of how you should approach the story?
I felt like there was rarely any conflict in terms of, I think meeting each other and talking about our stories and how we could help each other, and the editorial committee telling us that collaborations are incentivized. We want you to prioritize collaborations. So they tell us, go look for collaborations and we'll pay for those collaborations. Means if there's a good story between me and Indonesia and Tempo, we could pitch it together and we would get funding some funding to carry out that story. And that sort of set the culture, set the tone for our work. It wasn't like, let's go get a story. Whoever gets the best story gets the most praise. It's like, go out and work together, and those who work together best are rewarded. So that set the tone for how we work together. And I feel like instead the biggest challenge probably in terms of collaboration wasn't us trying to be secretive, but us not knowing what each other needed. So that was probably a bigger challenge. Like, I didn't know exactly what Indonesia would need unless Indonesia came and said, I need this. And then I would be able to help. But it's hard to offer anything if we didn't know what the other person, I wouldn't know what Nigeria needed, so, and I think that probably is more of a challenge that happens when you communicate across time zones. It's just really hard to get everyone in the same frame of mind at the same time. But probably, but we did kind of work through it at the end, when we worked on the full global story. So Rage actually produced the website that you saw, that you see on the global story. Means we designed it and we coded it. So the team at Rage did it. And I think that's also something that we we realized that somebody has to say, I'm going to do the hard work, and then deliver it. So we weren't paid to do the website, but we knew it was really important that the website looked good. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of text and photos on a website. And in this day and age, that sort of story just doesn't fly. So we had to say, okay, we're going to do the website. We're going to do designs. We're going to help write the story. And it's that sort of, I think it's that sort of initiative that's really important in a collaboration. Somebody just has to step up and say, I'm going to do the work, regardless of whether I'm going to get something extra out of it, you know.
So let's go back to Indonesia. So what about the same question to you? I mean, this question of how did you build trust? I mean, you said you knew everyone, but both in terms of style and just in terms of working together, like, was it easy? Was it difficult?
It was very easy in the beginning because we don't really know the scale. I mean, we have an idea of like, we want this to be a big enough reports and widely shared enough investigation, so it can actually impact the most. I mean, it can impact more people. And so basically, we started as let's just report. Let's just do investigations by ourselves and then publish it at the same date. That's it. That's the core idea. I mean, the simplest part of the project is that, like, let's just do our own investigations and publish it on the same date. But it evolves into, hey, I'm gonna have a interview with the government. Let's just say, like, the a part of the Ministry of Education, and then we all pitch questions, we all pitch resources to that. So it evolved. I mean, the collaboration kind of evolves from like a simple. I have a in at one point the editor-in-chiefs of like Tirto, editor of Jakarta Post and Vice and BBC News, they got together and they decided to like have this investigations go out at the same day. But it evolves into, because of everybody's our friends, it evolves into like something that we actually do together. And we don't really see like, oh, this piece is gonna go into Vice's story or Tirto's story or Jakarta Post story. It's just gonna go into the Nama Baik Kampus story. So whatever it is, we're just gonna get it, and then we pull it up. We pull it together on a cloud, and then we share them to everybody involved in the project. And I mean, on your previous question, you asked about like how the style itself can be different from one publication to one another. It also affects like how we're doing it. For example, like the one that Rizky mentioned, maybe he can actually expand on this later, that not everybody is actually agree. Not everybody agree to publish names or publish faces. Maybe Rizky can add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Yuda. Yeah, so I think there's power in different styles of reporting. Like Tirto and Jakarta Post have their own reputation of, the way they tell stories, and Vice as well, as you said, aggressive and, like quote unquote brave and stuff. But we all knew about our reporting styles in the beginning, so we were really open to kind of like like very different kinds of reportings, and in the end, so we get like a different kinds of audience as well. So that's like kind of like that's the point of collaboration, to kind of like get as wide of audience as possible. People maybe like younger people who watch Vice, and then kind of like older people who speak English who read Jakarta Post, for example. And then in terms of the Vice style itself, yes, as Yuda said, even the Alliance of Journalism in Indonesia once has written that it's unethical to publish the name and the identity of a sexual assault survivor. So that was kind of like a risk that we took as a news organization, and after kind of like consulting with different women's organizations and human rights organizations, and saying that, if this is the decision of the survivor, what could we do to kind of like, respect that decision from them. So I remember that it was kind of like a huge conversation in the editing process whether we want to show her face or not. And I think the good thing is like Jakarta Post and Tirto are both, as brave as Vice in terms of, reporting stories. I've as sometimes even braver. They're they do, like, even especially Tirto, they have done a lot of investigation stories that name people and all this stuff, that so it wasn't really a problem for us. Yeah, and it was actually, there's power in numbers and in diversity of reporting.
And just to be clear, so you guys, in terms of your output, so we heard from Elroy that there was a lot of different pangolin stories around the collective, and then a big kind of wrap-up story for the group as a whole. But you guys, since you did a video, Jakarta Post did some articles, what were the various outputs that came out at the end, just so we have this clear in our mind?
Yeah, so Jakarta Post and Tirto publish articles, so it's like, written stories. I think Tirto is a little bit more investigative and deeper, and Jakarta Post is obviously in English. Vice does, the main output from Vice Indonesia is actually a documentary. I think it's 19 minutes video, and also a couple supplemental articles that kind of like, build on that video itself. But I think the biggest output of the collaboration is the hashtag Nama Baik Kampus, or campus reputation, that kind of like is like combines all these stories into one unity, or one really tangible movement that is shareable in social media.
Right. And so it was your video where, am I pronouncing her name right? Agni, the pseudonym used by the sexual assault victim, it was in your video that she kind of first spoke out. Is that right?
No, so it was actually a different woman in Bali. Agni is the person who started it all, right? But then she, I think because of a lot of like pressures on her parts, like, I don't think she would want to, reveal her identity, because Agni is a pseudonym, right? So the reason why we were assigned a story from Bali is because that's the only survivor who is willing to reveal her identity in a video, which is kind of like not, that's like really, a risk that she takes that we all support, basically.
Very good. I mean, so a kind of question, let's stay with Indonesia, then we'll go back to Elroy. But what were the problems that you encountered? I mean, I just think there must be all sorts of difficulties. You've got to coordinate between different institutions, all of whom have a different approach, maybe different capacity for risk. In particular, how gutsy they are. You mentioned earlier that you had worked for BBC Indonesia, and they then had to drop out at one point. So, I mean, what were the problems that you encountered in trying to work across institutions? So, Yudi, do you want to have a crack at that, and then I'll go to Elroy and see how that was on the other side.
Yeah. So actually, publication itself it was delayed for a couple of weeks, because everybody's not on board with all that we have gathered, the reports that we have written, and the videos we have edited. So everybody, so after everything, the investigations are done, we share it within each other and see what they think. So is this something that your organization want to link yourself with as well, right? Because like you said, I mean, it's not a lot of it. A lot of the conversation circles around like how we deal with identities, with names, and with the relation with the government itself. So that's when, and after a lot of conversation, one of our collaborators actually dropped out of the collaboration as well because of that. I mean, because of the conversation that we had after the investigations. And so that's one of the things that I think is an issue in collaborative journalism.
I see. Rizky, anything to add to that?
No, I think yeah, I think that's mostly it.
And Elroy, so what about on your side? I mean, you were working in a kind of slightly different situation. What were the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, it's not always kumbaya in, in these collaborations. People disagree, and I think um, I'm sure there were disagreements within our collaborations. I can't quite think of any in particular now, but I would say that perhaps our topic was had a little less risk in terms of backlash. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I imagine in Indonesia or even in Malaysia, a story like that, we would be really worried about the profiles involved, or the people who are speaking out and where their identity is shown. Those would be very difficult conversations to have. But for us, I think the editorial board and the managing editor set the tone for the relationships. We understood that it was about collaborations with local journalists, not about hiring fixers, because sometimes we say, look, if I had a fixer in Thailand, I could report on this story. I'd say that to the editor, and he'd say, no, that goes against what we stand for, and that's the end of the conversation. So at every point, we're reminded about what our collaboration means to everyone involved, and we behave accordingly because that's been set as a framework. I guess that's part of collaboration that's long term. So the Environmental Reporting Collective is going to continue producing stories every year. This year, there are plans already. I'm not as involved as I was last year, but there will be a story this year. Possibly COVID-19 would delay stuff, but then there's an editorial stance. There's an organizational framework for us to work within, and we understand where we might have different approaches in our organization, but when we come to this table, we speak a different language. So that's what's different between. I'm guessing Nama Baik Campus is more like just a one-off project, right? And there's space that's great. I think that's really something that we should always pursue. But for us, it was just different in that way. There's a framework, and we understood that framework.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll go back to Indonesia in a minute, but just in your case, and I presume, the different stories have different challenges, but you're dealing with some fairly unsavory folk, right? When you're dealing with smugglers of $1 million animals, there's some pretty dangerous people there. So you've got to come up with collective approaches to risk and protecting reporters and that kind of thing. It's hard enough to do inside one institution, let alone between a large number. So how did you approach that? It must have been quite difficult, mustn't it be?
So because it was our first project for the collective, basically each newsroom took care of their own legal challenges. Yeah, we didn't have a lawyer that represented all of us collectively. So for me, my organization would look into my safety. So I adhere to the risk assessments that I need to do before doing undercover work or meeting some of these smugglers. And I'm sure it's the same for the other organizations. They have very high safety standards for their journalists. We tend to think of journalism as a risky business. We are meeting unsavory characters, but in truth, okay, yeah, there are risks, but they are always calculated risks, and there's no risk that we take lightly. It's stuff that we have done background on, that we've went to the place and looked up the place before we even try to go and record something undercover. But I've realized that actually my takeaway from this project is these unsavory characters are usually just very normal human beings who do these things for a very human reason. I just need money, I have a family, and it's not as black and white as we often paint it out to be. Yeah, so that's my takeaway from this. But in terms of risk, we handled that according to our organizations. Yeah.
So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes to go. I have many more questions to ask our panelists, but if those of you watching have questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We've got one from Tasha, which I'll get to in just a minute. I suppose, Yudi Rizky, maybe Yudi, I'll go to you first. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning that the purpose of your project was to to kind of honor and respect the various victims of these crimes around Indonesia, both those that you profile and those that you didn't. I mean, collectively, how did you approach that? Because it's quite a difficult and sensitive subject, and whether you're going to try and get people to speak on the record, how you protect information. How did you talk about that collectively as opposed to individually? Yudi.
So in terms of like collective, as a collective, I mean, it's not a collective, right? I mean, it's more like a one. I mean, Alroy was right. I mean, it was like a more like a one-off collaboration between 4 media outlets. But as a collective, we really think that because of the report that I mentioned earlier, the one from Balairung Press, was really big, and it was really brave. And the one that you mentioned, Agni, she was the one that actually started this movement. Like, not a movement, like she started talking out about there are sexual violence that are happening in campuses across Indonesia, and that actually when that response from I mean, when that statement from Agni was met with the response, they're not as not nice, I think, from the campus itself and from the people who are commenting on the matter. We think that everything that we do from this point forward to this collaboration has to go to the side of the survivors. I mean, because they don't have any support, they don't have anything back then. I mean, after the collaboration, like right now and everything, like a lot has been a lot of sexual violence in campuses. I mean, there are still a lot of them, but some are actually like being exposed and actually met consequences. I mean, not because of this collaboration, but because of like people who are actually brave enough to actually speak about it. Like people like Meli, who speak in the video, and Agni.
Let me ask, so Tasha Mahabir asks a question. So she says, is investigative journalism being dampened down by publishers and their platforms trying to appeal to everyone? I guess another way of saying that, or something that occurred to me, is, do you think there's a risk that investigative journalism gets kind of parceled off into partnerships like this, and the rest of the organization thinks, okay, well, we've done our investigative journalism because we've done a few of these collaborative projects, and now we don't have to do the rest of it? Is there a sort of danger that the culture of investigative journalism gets kind of parceled out into these high-profile marquee projects, but it gets taken away from the rest of the publications? Or do you think, more positively, we hope that collaborations like this act as a kind of inspiration for editors and publishers to go out and do more investigative journalism and to kind of prove the case that this both attracts attention and ultimately attracts readers? So Elroy, do you want to have a crack at that? It's a good question.
Yeah, I guess to think that I would say that it's true on some level. Okay, somebody's done Panama Papers. We don't have to do a corruption story this year. It's it's all out there. But I think that these collaborations, like the Panama Papers, and that was one of the models, I think, one of the role models for our collective, is that they really empowered the local journalists. It's saying, okay, we have this big trove of information, and let's all try to sift through this together, and you guys can report stories on your own, in your own contexts. And I think that's really important. So collaborations, I hope, if they're cross-border, we try to look into that, because for many years, I'm sure in Indonesia it's the same. We get a lot of foreign network channels or foreign publications coming here and hiring our journalists as fixers or stringers, and we don't even get on the byline. So we hope things change. Yeah, perspectives on Malaysia should be reported on by Malaysian journalists, and I think that's fair. In fact, I think that's in a globalized society, that's the only way forward. You can have an impression of an American or a British man of Malaysia, but it's never going to be a nuanced report, as nuanced as if I was a journalist like myself was doing of if Indonesia, Rizky, or you guys reporting it would have much better context and much more nuanced reporting. So these collaborations need to strengthen local journalists, and that's going to be key. Yeah. Otherwise, yes, it's true. Then only these big marquee projects will take place, and local journalists would be feeding off the scraps that fall from the table. Yeah.
So I'll ask this to Yudi and Rizky in a minute, but Elwood, just tell us a little bit more. I mean, what did you take out of did you sort of look at these bigger international collaborations like WikiLeaks or the Pentagon Papers and sort of what did you take out of these previous more famous examples as inspiration, or what did you look at and think, we don't want to do that, they made some obvious mistakes that we don't want to follow?
No, really, I wasn't looking at that. I was focusing more on my own story, but the editorial committee who set our directions, clearly Panama Papers was one of the role models. Yeah, and we were clear that we weren't going to do fixers, we weren't going to do stringers, we're going to do local reporting that contributes to a global report. So yeah, and I take that as a real positive, and I learned from that. Yeah.
So Yudi, on the kind of bigger question of investigative journalism in general and the value of these sort of, I mean, in your case, it wasn't an international collaboration, except insofar as Vice is an international organization, I suppose. But how do you see the value of these in terms of investigative journalism more generally?
So, yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. So I think in stories like this, stories like Nama by Campus, I think it's kind of different from the Pangolin reports in terms of like everybody kind of, it's a common knowledge that, oh, this kind of things happen, but we rarely talk about it. Sexual violence in campuses happen, but we don't really talk about it. So that's why collaboration like Nama by Campus works, because, I mean, in order for people to talk about it constantly, it needs to reach as many people as possible. But in terms of like putting a local story like the Pangolin reports to a global audience, it's this kind of collaboration that we had, that Vice, Tirto, Jakarta Post, and BBC had. It's not designed to be like that. Designed to reach as many people as possible, and I think that's the takeaway for it. So I mean, if the investigative journalism want to, it's a common knowledge that needs to be said. I think like this kind of collaboration works. I think that's it. I think that's the my takeaway from that. Maybe Rizky had some things to add to it.
I agree with Yuda. I don't see any. I think there's more asset and values in collaboration like this. It's very different from Pangolin reports, in which that we're all local journalists. So I think the focus is the local stories, and kind of like I think investigative journalism is actually kind of like what do you call it? It's actually better off with this kind of collaboration, because as I said in the beginning, it's there's a lot of like stories that are taboo or kind of like really hard to talk about in Indonesia, but by kind of like combining with sources and supporting each other, it actually makes investigative journalism easier. With kind of like, and because we disperse the kind of responsibilities and the all the burdens that we have to take. And actually, if I don't agree that this is just a one-off collaboration, because even though Vice didn't join the second like the sequel of this collaboration, there was actually another collaboration called Nama Baik Gereja, which means it's the church reputation. So it was kind of like that. The collaboration for campus sexual assault has evolved into like another collaboration that tries to expose the sexual assault in different church organizations in Indonesia. So even though Vice is not involved in it, so it's it's kind of like just more proof that it actually makes investigative journalism easier and more possible because of this kind of like shared responsibilities and resources.
That's
Okay.
amazing. That's amazing, guys. That's so cool. James, I'd like to add something as well at this point. Do you mind?
Yeah, no, go ahead, please do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about investigative journalism as like really difficult, but maybe we also need to talk about how that spirit of investigation is actually should be in every journalist. I mean, it's not just having a secret source or a data leak or going undercover that becomes investigative. I think every time you report and you think critically and you try to find out whether what this person is saying is true, whether this really happened, and whether there's a counterpoint, and that's investigation. And for me, maybe just in Malaysia, I don't know, there's not enough of that kind of investigation happening at a more daily reporting level. We don't question things enough. And we don't leave investigation just to like specialist journalists. Yeah, everybody should do investigation. Yeah.
Well, so we're just about out of time, but let me ask, in a sense, what you guys are doing next. I mean, are you doing any similar projects of this sort, and what has happened to you just told us, Rizky, a little bit about what's happened after your collaboration, but maybe you're working on new things, or maybe you've had enough of this and you're going back to your day jobs. But Elroy, what about you? Do you want to sort of just tell us for a minute what you're doing before we close the proceedings today?
Yeah, in terms of the collective, the Environmental Reporting Collective has started investigations about a story which I don't think I can reveal, but it's about the environment and it's related to oceans. So if you want to follow their work, please look up Environmental Reporting Collective. Go to the website. They have an excellent Substack newsletter that they send out about everything related to the environment. So sign up for it. You get updates on what we're doing, as well as tips on environmental reporting or environmental journalism, or updates on environmental journalism that's happening in the world. So, yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, we all could do with a few more Substacks in our life. So, and what about Yudi and Rizky? You're still with Vice, but are you doing any more of this kind of work, or have you given it up now? Yudi, do you want to go answer that?
I think Rizky should go first.
All right, fine. So both Yuda and I have actually left Vice Indonesia for a year, and I'm actually taking a break as a journalist. So I'm excited for my next endeavor, which is still kind of like in the realm of collaboration, but it's more it's like a wider kind of like space, not just journalism, but like I would like to do more collaborative stories and films that are that focus on empowering LGBTQ people in Indonesia. So that's kind of like the big goal, and just just also want to kind of like give a shout out to everyone in this collaboration, hashtag Nama Baik Kampus, who this, as you know, this is not just a two persons project, right? So, for example, from Vice, Ardian Erlangga, Arzia, Alia, Sharifa, and also from Tirto, Aulia Adam, and Fahri Salam, and from Jakarta Post, Evi Mariani. Thanks to everyone who has kind of like made this possible.
Cool.
Very good. Well, best of luck with that. So, Yudi, do you want to say what you're doing next?
I left Vice also with Rizky, and right now I'm actually helping a lot of media organization starting out their video departments and everything. I mean, especially local news outlets and really small organizations. So we can have more documentaries and everything from Indonesia.
Cool.
Very good. Okay, well, congratulations to both of you and all three of you, depending on how we cut this group of three. But thank you very much to everyone for joining us. So I think that's been a fascinating discussion today. I feel like I learned a lot. All of the outputs of the story are interesting. The Vice video is particularly well put together. And as you can see on the Q&A, the big final report on the beautiful looking website about the pangolins is also worth your time. So have a look at that. So many thanks to my 3 participants and to Christine from SOPA for organizing today. Hopefully some of you participating will be thinking of putting your nominations in for the next round of SOPA Awards, which are hopefully pandemic allowing to be held as usual in June of next year. So with that, many thanks for joining us and have a good the rest of your day.